thank you all for being here. One of the things that I love so much about welcoming people to Spelman is that I know all of you by your first names. That is really, really exciting to me. As you all know, our openings are typically nothing short of mayhem. So we decided that this time we wanted to give you all a really special treat and introduce you to the curator of Material Girls. This is an absolutely exciting show, and I have had the privilege of working closely with Michelle Joan Wilkinson on this exhibition. So I really don't want to say too much tonight other than welcome you all tonight, let you know that you're in for an exceptional treat if you have not had the opportunity to actually walk around the museum, and also just thank you all for being sort of really, really staunch supporters of the museum. I have the privilege also of working with an amazing staff. And again, we all know you all by name. So Wyatt Phillips is the administrative assistant, and Ann Collins Smith is the curator of collections. And so we just really wanted to open the doors a bit early for you all to hear about this exhibition, which has, in less than a week's time, really piqued the interest of Atlanta and our students and the college campus. So hats off to you and kudos. We're really, really excited. So lots of stuff on the horizon this semester at Spelman, everything from trips to special guests from different artists. Happy to share with you all that Shakaya Booker, the artist represented here, is going to be here on November 7th. So we are confirming details for Joyce Scott for October 22nd. So we're in the midst of a lot of exciting, dynamic things. So without further ado, I'm really privileged to turn it over to Michelle. So thank you all for being here.
Hi, everyone. First, I actually would just like to say thank you to Andrea and thank you to all of you for coming out this evening. This is a very special exhibition to me. It's personal in many ways, and what I'm going to share with you this evening is some of the reasons that it's so personal. But it was just awesome to know that she was interested and that Spelman was interested in hosting it. When we organized it at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore, which is where I'm a curator, we thought about it traveling, and the first place that we wanted it to come, first place I wanted it to come was here. I think that this is really a special second home for it, so it's just been a great, great opportunity. I am going to actually do a tour, but before I do the tour, I just wanted to share some things with you all. I think all of you appreciate art, and in addition to art, stories I think are important. Often stories are how we come to know who we are in the world. And the work behind me is by Maya Freelon Asante, so I was planning to start here for the tour, but I'm also starting here with my own story, because when you look at the works on the wall, to me they kind of look like fabric. It looks like it might be, you know, tie-dyed silk or something like that, and they're actually tissue paper. But the fact that they look like fabric kind of goes back to where my story begins with Material Girls. I grew up in Brooklyn, and my mother worked for many years in the garment industry in New York City. So she didn't work with fabrics herself, but she was in the accounting side. And often in the garment industry, you get to bring home materials. So kind of weekly, she was bringing home different colors, different textures, different, you know, patterns. The company that she worked with specialized in print. So this was the 80s, and there was like cabbage roads and crows and color block and just a variety of different materials. So I grew up in a house that was always seeing that type of material come in, fabrics come in. I lived with my mother and my aunt. There were no men in the house, and my aunt was a dressmaker in the evenings. She worked. This one? Well, maybe in some reiteration of that perhaps, but even the idea of the skirt, you know, it reminds me of seeing the different types of materials come in, like crinoline or taffeta, and I talk a little bit about some of those things in the acknowledgement section of the Material Girls catalog. So my mother would be bringing home these fabrics, and my aunt would be sewing all the time. She was a dressmaker by profession, really by profession, and a receptionist during the day. So people would be coming in and out of the home. She would be doing bridesmaids' dresses, and I just grew up in that space. And then I come from a Caribbean family, so I don't know if you all have been to the Caribbean or been in Caribbean homes in the US, but we kind of layer a lot of things. We like a lot of color. I'm generalizing, of course, but you know, so there were tons of house plants. So there was a whole wall of just green. There was crushed velvet sofas that had plastic over them. And then on top of the plastic, there were doilies. So you had so many textures. You know, in the winter, there were red and gold heavy drapes. And in the summertime, they were lace. So just being a child in that home and in that space, without thinking about it, you were just surrounded by materials, you're surrounded by color, you're surrounded by texture. And I just really came to love all of those things. And you know, I've always been interested in interior design, and I think some of it is deciding how I want my house to look differently from that, but also bringing some of the things that made an impact on me to how I decorate my own home. So kind of going back to Material Girls, one of the key ideas for me in organizing this show was understanding what do contemporary artists who grew up in maybe homes like the home I grew up in, what do they inherit? What do they bring to their art making? And to me, this is one of the results. Alice Walker wrote an essay in I think it was 74, 76, called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and the subtitle was The Creativity of Black Women in the South. And that essay was foundational. I went to Bryn Mawr College, a women's college, and so, you know, it's kind of one of these classic things that you read with the Bryn Mawr education. But in that essay, she talks about all of the women like her mother, who was a gardener and loved plants and was very nurturing in a very creative way. Women who made quilts, women who were just engaged in artistic practices, but those women were not called artists. Maybe they call themselves artists, maybe a small community of folks around them saw them as artists, but that wasn't how they went down in the history books. And what I see a lot of the artists in this show doing is really they are artists in their own right. They are, a lot of them, I think the majority of them are working primarily as artists. Some of them may teach also. So they're in the canon of what it means to be an artist, full-time fine artist. But the traditions that they grew up around, women that, like my aunt, women that sewed, or women that made baskets, or women that put together quilts, these are artistic processes and practices from craft traditions that are informing the way they put together what they're doing in the 21st century. And what makes it, I think, even more special is the way they're pushing that boundary by using materials that typically are, I would say, either outside or at the edge of the art-making canon. So that's kind of the overview. I'm going to start just talking about Maya, and I'll move to around the space so that we can kind of get a better look at each artist. So Maya Freelon Asante, her work is along this wall here and behind you there, and then the small little piece right in the center, which we'll come up to. The work behind me is called Gestation. And Maya was pregnant with her first child when she was creating this piece. So if you notice, there are actually 9 pieces from, really she's talking about from the moment of kind of conception through the moment of giving birth. The 8 pieces here are attached to the wall to kind of show the mother's body and the child growing inside, and then the last piece is about the birth once the child comes out. What she's doing is a technique that she's really, I guess, invented called, well, 2 techniques. Tissue ink. Monoprints is one of the techniques she uses. This is actually just tissue ink that has been, if you imagine colored tissue paper that's been saturated with water and then allowed to drip onto other pieces of paper to create these stains. She was an art student, an MFA student in Philadelphia, and she was living with her grandmother. And in the grandmother's basement, one day this is before she started using this process. One day she discovered tissue paper that had been damaged. It was just, sitting there, had gotten wet, but she noticed there was this beautiful, beautiful pattern on it. And I think we've all had those experiences. We see something that, has been damaged, or, ink has bled through some paper, but it creates a kind of, it's an evocative moment sometimes when you're looking at that. And she thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. How can I replicate it? So she started experimenting and wetting tissue paper, but at first she wasn't getting the results that she expected. And the reason was because the way the tissue paper that had been damaged was wet, it had been wet slowly over a long period of time, which is a different type of dripping and kind of spiraling out slowly. And so she realized, there's something there also about time management, about the passing of time in history. If you also think about watermarks, as it goes down each level, there's a mark. So she started slowly dripping the tissue paper onto other pieces, letting the color and ink stain. And these are the results. What she's done is taken different pieces and then attached them with glue to each other. So this is, again, kind of going back now to a quilting process. Her grandmother that she was living with was a quilter, and she would save scraps of paper for her. She would actually save everything. She was one of those women that held on to everything. And Maya is doing something similar now in her art practice. In addition to these pieces, she also makes tissue ink monoprints, which, if you look up to the right, that piece is called Keep Your Head Up. And the tissue ink monoprints are used, they're not using just the tissue paper, but she's bleeding the colored ink and the paper onto different type of paper. And then those pieces of paper, when the monoprint is finished, whatever's not used, she's taking the scraps of the unused monoprints to create these works. And this is the first work of its type. For her, it was a site-specific installation at the museum, and I think that it translates really well in this space also. And Keep Your Head Up, of course, it's meant to kind of give you encouragement. You have to look up to see it, and that's the same gesture that the piece is talking about. Are there any questions?
Site-specific? You get to keep it?
Well, no. What's interesting, her father is the architect Phil Freelon. Some of you may have heard of him. He's one of the architects that's been commissioned to work on the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Mall at the Smithsonian. He's actually one of the architects that designed the museum where I work as well, the Reginald Lewis Museum. So it was really incredible to have a kind of site-specific work by her installed in the same building that her father had helped to design. Her mother is the jazz artist Nina Freelon, who some of you may know. So she comes from, again, this kind of artistic tradition and family. This work is called Time Lapse, and in some ways it kind of replicates what we were just talking about in terms of having kind of a ripple effect. Maya talks about this piece as, think of a tree that if you would just cut inside of it, what it would look like. These pieces are, again, scraps. So these are leftover scraps of tissue paper from other works that are then, with tape, just double-sided tape, I believe, to each other in this kind of continuous circle. She actually worked on this piece with two other young women who were her interns, and they each did a really, really long strand and then attached them. So she really sees this as a communal piece that is about kind of the passing of time, and the tissue paper for her is fragile, but at the same time, the whole point of gluing it together is to show that it can have strength when bonded. And so these are then metaphors for her, for the human condition, as well as for African American resilience. So these look heavy, but they don't look nearly as heavy as they really, really are. This work is by Martha Jackson Jarvis. It is called Scent of Magnolia, 1, 2, and 3. Here is Crossroads Trickster, 1, 2, and 3 again. And this piece is Umbilicus 2. Martha Jackson Jarvis will actually be here tomorrow to talk about her work herself. But what I will share with you is that this work has so much dynamic energy in it to me. When the show opened at the Reginald Lewis Museum and we were bringing in these works to the gallery, I just kind of had to sit on the floor and like almost pet them. What Martha does to me is really incredible. There's concrete inside, and then there's a mixture of stones and glass tile. But imagine someone going to stone quarries, selecting stones of different shapes, different sizes, different colors, sorting them, washing them, and then creating with them new works of art. So when you get in really close, you can see, the way that even the stones are patterned. Sometimes at the end, you'll see really small stones. In the middle, there'll be larger stones. So they look pretty much like organic forms, like they could have just, grown that way, these kind of pods. But just the imagination of the artist to kind of recreate them from something that was alive and existing. So
It must have taken a crane to put them in.
it didn't take a crane. Well, I don't know if it took a crane to get them in here. There were many, many men. And then actually, Spellman did do some beautiful installation photographs. So if you go to their Twitter account, you'll be able to see some photographs of us installing this work, and as well as Crossroads.
Does the order or the position change from exhibition to exhibition?
She did not give us any really specific instructions about how she wanted it installed, but we just used existing photographs of it. But there really should be some type of connection between the three of them. When we first put them down in the space, they were much further apart, and then as we were creating the installation, we started to move them until we felt like there was a cohesion there. This is called Crossroads Trickster, and you'll have to read the panel also, because this one is a bit complicated, but what I will say about it is that originally this work was created for a museum, but there was a museum that had a sculpture garden, and the sculpture garden kind of wandered into the wilderness. So she created this work to be right at the crossroads, as she saw it, between this kind of manicured sculpture garden and this area where the wilderness began. One of the things that's not on the panel that's very fascinating about the work, these are bricks, terracotta colored bricks. These bricks were bricks that were used to build a prison. And the prison was then, by prisoners, made the bricks, built a prison. They're in the prison. When the prison was demolished, she recovered a lot of these bricks for this work. And so there's just so much power. She's also using the term crossroads and trickster here because she's referring to the Yoruba god Eshu Elegbara, who's known as the trickster god or the guardian of the crossroads. And the properties and colors associated with him are iron oxide, so that kind of rustish color. So there's a play on words in the title, there's references to African spirituality, and there's also a commentary about, the prison is not really a crossroads, it's a place that, you're incarcerated. But the idea of hammering into these bricks, kind of freeing them from the block that they were in to create something of art was really profound and beautiful. So in addition to the bricks, you'll see that she has pieces of colored glass and different carnelian stones. So she's kind of lightening the mood of this work. It's one of my favorites. And we probably should have a sign that says, come close but don't touch, because it's so important to get close enough to really see what's happening in here.
Can you say a bit about just size and weight of these?
Yeah, these are probably about 300 pounds each. Those